over about the last 10 years, a fair bit of farmland has been taken out of production, and some of that's reverted to the wild. And yet, despite there being less farmland being used now, the amount of food that the world is producing is still increasing at a pretty damn rapid rate. And so it isn't obvious at all what the upper bound is for population capacity.
And here we have Jordan Peterson making a statement about one of the big tenets of faith of technocapitalism and the technocapitalist clergy. And that is the decoupling of economic growth from harm to the environment. And the idea here is that we can continue to grow the economy indefinitely on a finite planet because the economic growth through the creativity of the wealthy class is going to separate itself from the resource base. And this is a big part of their program, because if it's true, then all we have to do to solve all of these complicated problems we have is just go shopping. Just keep on shopping, give your money to those plutocrats, and that will fund their technological innovation, and that's going to solve all of our problems. Hi, I'm Mike Hogue, and I'd like to know, is this actually true? Are the wealthy going to save us with their capitalism magic? Well, I'm not an economist, but I am a guy who's worked in farming and in food systems policy my whole life. I've worked with the Sierra Club, with the state PIRGs, other environmental and food organizations. I have worked with managing farmers markets. I've worked on farms of pretty much every scale, managed farm businesses myself, worked in a farm credit operation, worked in the nation's largest sustainable aquaponics research facility. I've been in a whole lot of other different fields around food and farming and food policy. And I think I'm pretty well versed in food systems and in the sustainability issues around them. So let's take a look and see if we can figure this out. Now, oftentimes when people mention this hypothesis, this is a paper that they mention by Hannah Ritchie here. After millennia of agricultural expansion, the world has passed peak agricultural land, meaning no new agricultural land will be added into the food system. Is it true? Well, the first thing we have to understand here is that not all land is equal. So this number that they're using here, that the land per calorie, basically land units per food units, is not really an important number. It really doesn't mean anything when it comes to what we're trying to say here, that there's some sort of decoupling happening. This is because land is not all the same. And just to get an idea of this, like 100 acres of depleted farmland that has been nothing but monoculture desert in North Dakota for 100 years is not the same as a chunk of land in the Amazon rainforest that's old growth forest with high biodiversity. Now, I can't let 100 acres of North Dakota desert go to wild and then take and deforest 100 acres of the Amazon and claim that that's equal, right? So not all land is equal. And the soil itself is not just an inert media. It's not just dirt. The soil itself can have a lot of special qualities to it. There's a difference between great farmland and poor or moderate farmland or marginal farmland. And, for example, some farmland has really great soil carbon. It holds on to soil carbon better, so that helps fight climate change better. Because that carbon, it can hold more water and host more soil life. It can hold more fertility and contain more fertility. It's going to use and require less fertilizer, less pesticides and poisons. Now, that's really great farmland. And other farmland does not have that benefit. So once we realize that we can't really compare 100 acres of desert in North Dakota to 100 acres of old growth Amazon rainforest, then, and that's comparing apples to oranges, we have to reevaluate this whole idea. Because what Hannah Ritchie was saying is true, probably. that the total number of acres involved in agriculture is going down, but we're starting to recognize that maybe those acres aren't all equal. And if you look back at the studies that Hannah Ritchie cited, they don't really include that in their methodology. So, one of the big mistakes here is just in thinking that that number means too much of anything, because it doesn't. So instead, what we want to focus on is something that we could call something like finite land resources, or finite soil resources, or soil itself. Is agriculture decoupling from soil loss? No. We know that agriculture is continuing to degrade land, perhaps at an even faster rate than it used to. We're losing soil at the same rate that we always have. So agriculture has not decoupled from the real resource involved here, which is the finite resource of soil on the land and soil fertility. And because of that, with that, we're seeing that deforestation is also on the rise. So deforestation has not decoupled from agricultural productivity. The major driver for deforestation globally is agriculture. And that's still going up, even though we're claiming that this decoupling has occurred. And so this is happening in the north as well, but the real places that it's happening is like in the Amazon and in the rainforest, in the Brazilian, some of the highest biodiversity places on the planet. We are continuing to deforest those. And even though that rate of deforestation went down for a little while, that rate is actually climbing back up now once again. So again, we are not seeing much evidence that decoupling is happening here from real land resources with agriculture. And so when we start to look at the productivity involved here, we can look at something like this, and we can see that when it comes to just choosing soybeans as one marker crop, that it's remaining pretty constant over the decades since 2003 with the rest of the world. And the major increases in productivity are coming from some of these regions, such as the Amazon, where we are deforesting and converting old growth, really important forest into food production. And so a lot of that food production starts out with beef and with cows. What we're doing is cutting down forest and converting the forest into cows for a very short period of time. And when we do that, we never get those forests back. They're never going to be the same. We can't just stop farming them and pretend that we have reverted that back to wild, because it will be hundreds of years before that forest returns to its same biodiversity and soil health. And so when we look at that and think about that, we see that a lot of major food crops have actually kind of stabilized globally. And what we're seeing in terms of increased productivity is more cows, because we're converting rainforest into cows. Now, with that, what we're seeing is that the major areas where we're switching intensifying agricultural production, like in the Latin American and Caribbean, and in Southeast Asia in particular, those areas are having massive impacts on biodiversity loss. So is productivity actually continuing to increase the way they're claiming? Actually, no. In fact, a lot of agronomists and agricultural critics are really concerned that productivity is actually starting to wane in a lot of ways. Here we see U.S. agricultural output has grown slower in response to stagnant productivity growth over the last recent years. And in fact, this is called the global agricultural productivity gap. We have forecasted how much productivity increase we'll need to continue to hit our estimated population by 2050, and we're declining. We're not hitting that. We're not hitting those marks, and a lot of people are really concerned about that. So this magical mana of rich people driving productivity through their benevolent greed doesn't actually appear to be happening. In fact, we can see it with like corn yields. For a long time, corn yields were going up as we were increasing fertilizer and pesticide use, and pesticides were getting better, in particular in farm equipment. Some other things were going on there that were probably not actually great or good things, but they were happening. And but it hasn't been continuing as strongly recently. We can see that with corn production here. We can see that with soybean production. It's kind of leveled out compared to the steep curve we used to have. And the amount of land that's been in corn and soy has not really declined significantly as well. So this brings us to another major issue here. So far, we've seen, has agriculture actually decoupled from its damage to the soil? No. Has it decoupled from deforestation? No. Has it decoupled from the cost to biodiversity? No. And here we start to understand why. See, when we're talking about this decoupling issue or productivity, we're talking about gross productivity, not net. And you see, we have to spend energy to get food calories, right? Now, if you go back to hunter-gatherer times, academics would say that we would spend like 10 to 30, or 1 calorie for every 10 to 30 that we get back. We get more back than we put in. That makes a lot of sense. That's sustainable, right? Well, these days, we've actually flipped that. And you see that here on this graph. Through all of human history, we've had this yellow bubble on the bottom left here. And that's because the agricultural system was essentially self-fueling because it produced its own energy. Then, as we increased fossil fuels and pesticides and fertilizers, that's the blue on the bottom there, and we see that correlating to a corresponding drop in the sustainability of our agriculture, the way it is now. And now we have very, very low yields for the amount of energy we put in. And that comes with a lot of costs because one of them is, for example, nitrogen fertilizer, which we get from the Bosch-Haber process, and that involves lots of energy into it, which usually come from fossil fuels, and machines that are driven on fossil fuels and refrigeration and all these other things. So our food system also hasn't decoupled from climate change. It's still considered overall, with deforestation and animal agriculture included, and to be the number one driver of climate change. So that has not changed either. And as you see here, productivity has been going up slowly, but we've been having to increase our rate of nitrogen fertilizer at an ever-increasing rate in order to get to make up for that. Because our agriculture depletes farmland, which is why that net farmland number doesn't make much sense. And what really matters is, like I said, the finite land resources that go into food production. So overall, really in areas where we've been farming for a long time, we've been taking some small amounts of marginal depleted farmland out of service in order to cut down rainforests to replace them with. But we haven't been reducing land that much. So in the end, does it seem like the wealthy are actually going to save us with their capitalism greed magic? It doesn't look like it to me. In fact, it looks like we're going to have to get involved in this if we want to fix it. Does this mean that we're just all screwed royally and there's nothing we can do? No, of course not. We can fix this, but we actually have to do it. We can't just sit back and keep shopping and expect the wealthy to do it for us. We're going to have to get involved. We're going to need more hands on food. We're going to need to make sure, stop stealing land from the indigenous people who are stewarding it well and help them maintain access and management over that. We need smaller farms. We've got to reverse regulation that is imposing these large, unsustainable farms on us, get involved voting, and bring back the whole idea of democracy. This is not a decision that we can afford to just let the wealthy make for us. We have to get involved too. Thanks.